Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Very special guest today, Damon Von Schweikert and Leif Swanson from Von Schweikert Loudspeakers. Thank you so much for joining. How are you guys today?
It's our pleasure. I'm very good.
Doing good. Thanks.
Cool, man. For those not extremely familiar with your brand, can you just kind of give me a little lay of the land in terms of what the brand's been up to?
Sure.
The brand, as it is now with the loudspeakers, has been around for almost 20 years. But can you just kind of take a step back and give us the whole kind of Von Schweikert layout of the layout?
Absolutely. It'd be my pleasure. So basically, I guess the way I classify it now is it's a second generation business. My father began professionally designing and producing loudspeakers in 1976 in a garage in Whittier, California.
Whittier, I've been there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was awesome. And as a kid, my first job, probably 7 years old, was grabbing sheets of MDF on the backside of a table saw. And it was the typical, garage business start off, not dissimilar from Silicon Valley businesses were going on at the same time. And so it was really cool to do that. And over the years, my father, had a couple iterations of his company. In the 80s, he had Vortex Acoustics. There were some very successful designs that came out of that called the Vortex Screen. And then in the early 90s, 92, is when he started Von Schweikert Research, really hit the scene with a successful design known as the VR4. Now we call it the Gen 1 because there were previous generations that came out afterwards. It was very, very successful business that he grew and we grew together until we had an unfortunate series of events that led to a flood in upstate New York. It wiped out the factory. It was not covered by insurance. And so we found ourselves traveling back to California in U-Hauls in 1999. And the minute my dad got back, he moved to San Diego and he started the business up and he called it Von Schweikert Audio. And that's what we have today, 20 years later. So.
Okay, that's unfortunate. So now at the point we're at, the company makes loudspeakers from like $8,000 all the way up to $500,000 or more. Mm-hmm. I think that most people want to know is when a loudspeaker costs, upwards of $500,000.
Correct.
What are some of the largest contributing factors to how it could possibly cost that much? Because I would never say it's not worth it. If you have that kind of money, that it's a luxury good. I'll never be able to afford it, but some people can't understand. Can you help those people understand what goes into making it cost that much?
I can try.
Yeah.
The best answer I can give is we're very proud that we still produce loudspeakers in the United States, in California. The cabinets are produced there. We care a lot about what that means. For us, it means that a quality level that is, we've spent 40 years perfecting our design technology. And the way, part of that the performance that we get is how it's constructed. So by building it all here, we have 100% control over the quality levels. And I'm not just talking about fit and finish on the outside. I'm talking about how the components are situated on the board. We don't use printed circuit boards. They look beautiful for photography, and when people look at that, you think it's high tech. I mean, and a lot of the high tech equipment that we have is that. And I'm not diminishing. There's great components that come from that, but not our speakers. We do point-to-point soldering, and we use the placement of our boards are just as important. The distances between the circuits and even the components within the circuit can affect the ultimate result, right? So we build it at the quality level we need to, and we give it the time it takes to achieve the level of performance we're trying to achieve, and then we pay for it. And that's what ultimately affects our price. We've worked really hard. I know people may think 8,000, right? We've worked very hard to deliver a speaker that has all the promise of what I believe our brand gives to its customers, and yet we really push hard to put the price down. And unfortunately, it's expensive. But when it comes to our components and what we work on, we have a legacy, for what it's worth in the world. And we travel quite a bit. And we do shows all over the world. There's a reputation that comes with manufacturing in the U.S. still for loudspeakers. And we work really hard to maintain that legacy. And unfortunately, it comes out in the final MSRP. Like I said, every day, Leif and I look to figure out what we can do to deliver the most performance at those price points. And it's funny, we had a conversation with a gentleman today who said, he's talking about one of our models. I'm not going to pump this up too much, but he was blown away by the sound performance he was getting at that price point. And how can you sell at that price point was literally the question he asked us. And I said, because we don't base our price point on the performance. We base our price point on what it takes to build it, and then we have a formula, and we go from there.
Yeah, I think in terms of some of the things that people miss when they don't have access to a lot of extraneous budget that it takes to get this level. One of the things a lot of people miss is, regardless of where you fall, if it's in your value set or not.
Correct.
From my experience at audio shows, a lot of fun things start at 10 grand. It's a weird thing because it's such an astronomical number for so many people. But like, if you can just come to an audio show and listen, you'll see what I mean. At $10,000 and up, incredible things start to happen with loudspeakers.
For sure.
And it's just an unfortunate result of the market. But I think that the people who really balk at those price tags, and I'm one of them. I don't go around buying 10 grand speakers very often, but it's really fun. So if you can find your way into the hobby, that is like, well, man, if you can get to that point, that is a thing where, I think that everybody should give it a knock and look at it and kind of see. So it's cool that you guys do something around 8, 9, 10. And I guess my question is, when it comes to like a $500,000 speaker, is it like the wood construction? How does it get that high?
Well, the amount of time that we put in when we design a loudspeaker, I mean, there's so many different facets of this. I mean, the amount of time we take just in dealing with cabinet resonance and the research that we do. And it's not like we just draw a speaker out on a piece of paper and we just, build this, okay? We need to look at where the bracing is, every single aspect of it. I mean, we spend a fortune just on the cabinet design part of it. Right. And then there's multifacets of not just a cabinet. I mean, it's not like we're just using MDF. Some stuff has a combination of an MDF, and then it has another skin of HDF. And then we're using our triple wall laminate material inside, which has to be strategically placed. The trick is to, by the time we're done, we're dealing with a type of active vibration control. Yep. No two panels inside that enclosure will resonate at the same frequency. I mean, just the expense. The Ultra 11 was what, two years just in easily?
Well, and the one part I want to make sure we explain is it's an iterative process, right? So even though we have 40 years of technology that we're incorporating into all of our designs, with a product like Flagship, right, which is what we're talking about.
The model name is Flagship?
Well, no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. A flagship product like the Ultra 11.
Oh, Ultra 11,
right, which is our current pinnacle, but we have several in the Ultra line, which we consider all to be flagship products. The iterative process, we may have 5 or 6 cabinets just during test that different baffles, right? And then we go into reinforcement. So there's a lot of expense that goes into that piece of it. But another aspect that's worth considering is, when we're trying to hit an $8,000 price point, we know what the math is, right? So we know what cost of goods need to be this level in order to hit that. And so we try to figure out, okay, well, how can we get the most performance out of this at that price point in cabinet considerations, because that's lion's share of it is a big factor. How can we get more parts to actually make sound as opposed to the ones that don't make sound and things like that? Well, with the Ultra line, we took a different approach. We said, okay, in our minds, it was cost no object. We said, okay, we don't care. We're not trying to hit a cost of goods. We built it, instead of top down, we went bottom up. And we said, okay, what's the best transducer? What's the best mid-range? What's going to give us the most musicality that's both musical and resolute, right? And so with our designs, we try to walk a very, I call it the middle way. We try not to be too resolute, which I think becomes hi-fi, and we try not to be too musical, which I think becomes colored. So you need to find that right tonality that is in between. And
Because you can have both.
you can have both, but
To me, that's the real sweet spot, anyways.
Yeah.
Correct.
And it is like a scale, because you're right, absolutely right. And I've said this before on the show. It's like too much analytics, and it gets too. I wouldn't call it the
I
hi-fi
know.
sound,
That's my
but
thing.
it is a characteristic of like,
Right.
oh man, that sounded really hi-fi. It's an element, but the extreme is too
Right.
much.
Correct.
And then if you get too much musical, I don't really love musicality, but if you get, it's too romantic,
Right.
On
Too-
one side,
yes.
it's too lush. It's just too. It's not clear enough.
Correct.
So yeah,
Correct.
absolutely. And colored is a great way to put it. That is a great way to think when you're listening, guys. Like when you're listening to it at the hi-fi show or whatever, it's absolutely a scale, just like you would taste a wine. It's like dry to sweet and these kind. That is our unique scale, I believe.
Correct.
At this level, at least.
I agree. And well, for one thing, like when you're sitting there, we had the benefit recently of hearing a string quartet, and we're standing 3 feet from these musicians. And the first thing that came to mind was not, hey, listen to those highs, right? It was.
There were no tweeters.
Right. There was no tweeters. There were you weren't analyzing it.
You're right.
And that's ultimately what we're trying to achieve with our product, is that it's supposed to be live music. And if our designs don't achieve that, then we're falling short.
So I want to go back to what you were talking about with cabinet design. So if you guys haven't really experienced really high-end cabinet design, some of the tricks and little fun tricks you can see are situations where there's like zero vibration at all from the cabinet. So the kind of the cliche demo is to like put a nickel like with a flat edge and just balance it on the edge, and then play some bass. And miraculously, you wouldn't believe it, there are some speaker cabinets, really high-end ones, where that nickel doesn't even bounce at all. Like nothing. It just sits there.
Right.
Perfectly. It's incredible because there's tons of bass coming on. Everybody knows what it's like to sit in a car with tin cans rattling in the back. So you were saying, though, a step further than just this non-conductive is that you're saying the resonant frequency for the entire cabinet it's not one resonant frequency. I mean, certainly it has to collectively be one, right?
Well,
No.
Everything has its own resonant frequency, right? So every
So
physical.
you're saying individual areas will be different resonant frequencies throughout the box.
Right. So if any speaker manufacturer claims that there's one magical, yes, I'm
Material.
going here, one magical material that cancels or eliminates resonance, I'm sorry, they're full of crap. I don't care what they say. But, take a rectangular box and put one brace going down the middle. You now have 4 panels, side panels, that are all resonating at the same frequency. And am I giving away too much? No. So the trick is you don't want that, because as the moment 2 panels start resonating at the same frequency, it increases. And it builds and it builds and builds. So what we do is have no panels resonating at the same frequency. And when they sum as a whole, that's the design philosophy and techniques that we use. And as far as I'm concerned, I have come across nothing better. We've built stuff out of aluminum before. And
We've incorporated that into designs in the past. Yeah, absolutely.
And
But you would just say that wood is still just the most superior material for cabinet making?
I think
Because
it's a combination.
if at $500,000, you could try out almost
Right.
anything, right? You make it out of concrete. You pour concrete in someone's house.
Absolutely. What I would say is, philosophically,
Yeah.
I was sincere when I said we try to find how to invest the majority of the cost of goods, of whatever product it is, in what makes sound possible in our design and the performance level. And the cabinet is not that. The cabinet is the enclosure, and it's about being, it's about not introducing distortion and coloration into the final product. So I would say that through the use of wood and other materials, is I hope we get a chance to explain in our constrained layer dampening, multi-layer dampening, I would say it's an elegant solution, because it allows us to invest more dollars of the customer's money in the sound producing components as opposed to the enclosure.
So you had mentioned that you guys had probably over time evaluated all types of tweeter systems.
Oh, yeah.
And could you just give us an example of all the technologies and what each one excels at and not? Because we have folded ribbon tweeters, we have beryllium, we have hard dome, and we have soft dome. From your experience, are the benefits and the negatives with each of those types? of all the stuff you guys have experienced and listened to from
Let
a
me
design perspective?
Let me put a caveat in front of that because I think Leif can speak to it. But I would say that whatever we say is in general.
Not for your. This is for listeners, for people who are evaluating that themselves.
Okay, so I won't speak for Damon. For me, it's simple. There are drivers that have good synergy together, and there's drivers that do not. I personally, right now, the ceramic drivers by Accuton. I actually prefer the Beryllium better than the Accuton tweeters going with them. There's certain things about it that I like. And so, therefore, that's why we chose to use the Beryllium tweeter in all the Ultra flagship products. But if we look at another speaker that we've done in the past, VR111s, which were a custom one-off for a gentleman in the Philippines, 9 feet tall speakers, crazy speaker. And that design, Albert was still designing for Von Schweikert at that time, and he wanted a one-voice speaker, so he chose all magnesium drivers. And so literally the choice of the drivers versus, if you're going to use a ribbon versus, Beryllium tweeter, for me, it's all about synergy. Which one has that identical tone? If you ever heard a speaker that you're listening to woofers and the bass kind of has one tonality, but then you get up to this mid-range and it's completely different.
Right.
We want the drivers that sound like one driver. So by the time we're done, it's just one cohesive sound, one single unified wave launch.
And I love the idea, and that is a hurdle, right? So it's almost like a small extension of how the biggest issue for, I think, applicable systems that are out there is like the subs don't blend. Someone buys a separate subwoofer,
right.
and very rarely will that blend perfectly with the rest of the
There's
spectrum.
tricks to that too.
I'm sure there is. But I would like to say I agree that there is a synergy, and if it's done right, it's just seamless, right? And that's what everybody should shoot for in their own home as well. But since you guys do use Beryllium, with the execution of Beryllium, sometimes there's a collective or a group of people out there that believe that the Beryllium drivers sound harsh or overbearing. Do you guys kind of?
By the way, they're not wrong. I try not to be ideological in the way I approach anything about our loudspeakers. Right? You never know where the next great performance improvement is going to come from, right? So you have to be open-minded. You also have to understand transducer design. While we are very happy and proud to lead on great transducer designers, that doesn't mean that we don't have something to contribute to what they're doing. And I would agree with a lot of people that there's a lot of Beryllium implementation out there that has developed that kind of reputation.
Right.
There's reasons for that. I don't know how much Leif wants to reveal, but there's a way to get performance out of a Beryllium driver that you don't sit there and go, oh, I'm listening to Beryllium. And the minute you're detecting the material, you've got a problem. There's a lot of reasons for that. Maybe the setup wasn't great. I'm not going to just say designs that do that are flawed. But if our design did that, during voicing, we would keep working on it because that's not the proper implementation, So I guess that's the best I have to say about that.
Well, so if I can add something a little bit to it, there's so many factors that are involved in how a Beryllium tweeter may sound. One of them is, believe it or not, it could be a width of a baffle, the diffraction that takes place. Therefore, when you have that diffraction and now you're trying to design a crossover for it, now you're trying to correct a frequency response that is abnormal because of this diffraction, which is one of the reasons why every single one of our speakers have almost absolute zero baffle. We've removed that from the equation. Two, there's manufacturers, obviously we won't go over any names, that use Beryllium tweeters. But the thing is if you...
it's just not one. It's very... a lot of
prevalent.
people do it.
Right,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
prevalent.
Right, yeah.
But when one of the things is like they have one version of a certain model of speaker, and it's like I would go and I'd listen to it, and literally after 5 minutes I got to get up and walk out of the room. Well, then they come out with another version, same speaker, but this is like a Mark II version. And all of a sudden, it's more pleasant to listen to. But what did they do to get that? Well, what they ended up doing is they ended up rolling off the upper frequencies of the Beryllium tweeter. Right. We don't do that. We allow ours to run at full frequency response. Right. But there's things that we've learned over, the amount of time Damon and I'll sit there and listen to different capacitors and figure out, what do we like? What works well with this? And that's what we implement. So all of our speakers are designed to have reference frequency response. That's a must. I've heard other designers sit there and say, well, I only care about phase and I only care about time alignment. Frequency response is irrelevant. Well, I'm sorry. When I'm listening to a piano run from the low keys all the way up to the high keys, I want to hear the same volume. So you
Great
can
example.
have both. You can have both.
Yeah.
It's like one note on a guitar is missing because there are 3 dB down there. It's like I don't want to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the easy, cheap ways to test is just to do a frequency sweep. Like they have them on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody can get to them, and you'll be shocked when it gets some not so bad in like the highs, but every once in a while you'll get bass response where it just disappears, and
Right.
then near the bottom it's just boom. It's all of a sudden it's huge again.
Right, a huge peak right there. Yeah.
Where do you guys fall on? Are you guys familiar with the Harman curve that they've developed at Harman Kardon, where it's the base average of all their research? They've developed a frequency curve that they feel the average person or most people out there. Do you guys buy into that? Do you tune by your ears? How do you guys kind of
No.
get to your linear response?
First thing I'll say is we're very heads down. As a matter of fact, right? I mean, is that fair?
No, that's absolutely fair.
Leif is much more prone. He gets around more than I do when checking out other product, but we have a voice. We know what we want. We know what we like, and we build for that.
Well, what would you say that is to you? And I'm not talking about specific response. What is the sound that you're going for?
I
your
can
mind?
tell you
In your
for me
mind.
what it is. Yeah. Okay, so I've been a live musician for ever since high school, and then I've been a professional musician almost virtually my entire life, and then right after high school, I started doing pro sound, running large scale venue concerts, mixing for those, and I'll just be totally conceited. I had an ear for it. Like I knew what the music was supposed to sound like. I knew if an acoustic guitar player was up there. There's engineers out there live engineers. They'll sit there and mix like a studio. They'll remove frequencies out of the acoustic guitar. Screw that. Make it sound like the real instrument. Right. Yeah. That's what I want. Don't sit there and EQ it because you think it needs to cut through. Yeah. If you have to do that, then your system's not set up right.
Right.
So for me, it's that sensation. I know what it feels like when I'm up on stage. I know what I'm hearing in my in-ear monitors. And then, I'll wear one ear monitor in and I'll leave one open. And then I can hear what the house or the venue that we're playing. It's all about that live performance. Yep. That's what I want. I want attack. I want... percussiveness, acoustic guitars, they are percussive. Pianos, those are percussive. I want to escape reality and feel like I'm listening to the real thing. Yeah. And not that it came to my house, that I went there. Yeah. That's for me, it's just that live music.
And this is another thing too, and you talked about subs before, and there's a lot of stuff going on, especially with bass. I could talk a long time about this, so I'll try and keep it brief. My dad was doing full range flat response speakers when it was impolite to have bass. Okay, and I'm talking about specifically was late '80s, early '90s. They wanted a little punch in the bass, but they didn't want the bloom and the fullness because it was really hard to control.
They didn't want to feel it; they just wanted to hear it.
Right, and that was. Okay, so that I'm not going to make a derogatory term about that sound. If that's what you're into, great, that's awesome. But that's not what we're into, and we haven't been doing that for decades, right?
But isn't that the correct?
Oh, sorry, that's a whole the correct and ideological discussion we don't want to get into. I'm just going to say that we want full range reference sound, and the bass needs to have weight and room to explore the room without overloading it and without becoming boomy and one note and any of that stuff. There's a lot of information, a lot of recordings down there, and when it's done right, you get that suspension of disbelief, right? So that you really feel like you're there, and when it's not there, you're not there. A lot of sub companies, and this could be a byproduct of home theater and whatever, but and I don't even know if people really conscientiously think about this, but I come into systems and I hear the sub, and I'm thinking, okay, why am I hearing the sub? This is not right. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but into our designs, both our standalone subs and integrated subs, they need to be fast, just like everything else. They need to be time and phased and everything to be part of that sound and not to be
total integration.
Total integration, right? That's a big part of our philosophy, right, and how we design. we're going for live performance. We're going for a situation where you're not picking up on the fact that you're listening to a stereo system. That's the goal. The setup, it takes a lot to get there. Don't get me wrong. And
we spend months on voicing.
And by the way, just buying our speakers doesn't make it so. There's so much. There's the rest of the components that go into it. There's the setup. There's the room. It's not just a simple solution like, oh, if I'm going to buy that, I'm going to get that. There's a lot more that goes into it. Now, we only work with representatives who are dedicated to ensuring that when someone does invest in our product, they're getting that performance because they go there and they work on it to get the setup right. So,
Right.
But the short answer is live. Live music is what we're going for.
Do you guys make a bookshelf? You said you do make a bookshelf size. Is it?
Oh, yeah.
Is it a 2 or a 3-way?
Three-way.
Three-way.
It's 3-way. Okay.
Yeah.
One of the questions that's come up before, or been propositioned at least, is that there is a trend throughout all like the collective products that are made in the bookshelf size that a simple 2-way can show more cohesiveness than a 3-way can.
Crap.
Where do you guys land on that? And since you do make a 3-way, obviously
Yeah.
you made your choice.
Right.
But do you think there's any merit to that idea at all?
Okay, I would say yes for certain
And
designers.
not just for your products,
No.
but for other people too.
I
right?
would say, okay, so, this is going to come across arrogant. It is what it is. My father and Leif, right, our two chief design officers consecutively, they excel at driver integration. So integrating 2 drivers is easier than integrating 3 drivers or 4 or 13 or whatever the heck you're doing. Yeah. And one of the greatest compliments, I talked about not being prideful, but it does instill pride in me, is when someone says, I'm standing 1 foot away from your massive concentric array Ultra 11s, and I don't hear drivers, right, even at a foot. So they integrate very close. Again, it comes into this ideological discussion. Just because the majority of designers maybe are having greater success because integrating 2 drivers versus 3 drivers, it doesn't make it the ultimate. And I would encourage listeners to approach everything with an open mind, the same way we do when we do our designs. Try to leave as much preconception at the door. You might experience things that you wouldn't expect to experience.
And so the 3-way is a concentric design. I find that design very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think are the benefits for that coaxial?
Well, because I already have time alignment right off the bat. So I don't have to worry about any sort of different shapes to the baffle. I have one mid-range, one tweeter that's perfectly time aligned. And then the sweet part about it is that the woofer we use just happens to have the same acoustic center of where the coaxial mid-range and tweeter are. But when you were talking about, some people have this belief that a 2-way is the most pure. Well, think about it. What does a 2-way speaker have to do? Not only does it have to reproduce crystal clear mid-range frequencies, but on top of it, it's got to reproduce bass. Okay? So think about all that cone motion and movement and modulation of trying to reproduce those deep bass frequencies that are actually modulating the upper mid-bass and lower mid-range frequencies a little bit. So that's why my preference is
Well, I think that's
3-way.
I think that's why the whole thing has a twist, right? That's what I think most people would expect, right? Oh, there's an extra driver that's dedicated.
Absolutely.
But then when you hear this mantra or this idea, you say, oh, maybe that's the thing. That's why it's interesting, right? That people say that, because the assumption is that a 3-way would be better because of this concept you just said. That's most likely true. That's why I find it interesting, and that's why I think other people may buy into it, because it's just kind of a surprise that you didn't think about. Oh, well, maybe just the way they can get the synergy going between a 2 in the box size, because the truth is that they make these 2-way drivers at $10,000 level and above for bookshelf. It's not isolated to things that are less expensive. This is like a choice that the big guys make just as much as the small guys do. And so I'm just curious about exploring that, because it's interesting. And I also do think with the bookshelf, and I'd love you guys' feedback on it, isn't the bookshelf in a way kind of an interesting challenge given the size restrictions? Because
that went right out the window.
Because the giant ones, you're like, oh yeah, I mean, it's almost limitless on the size. We have different sizes, but the bookshelf is unique in that it's constrained to a very small space. You really have to work with it, and there's a lot of technological challenges, from what I gather, to that.
Well, okay. One thing I do want to state, though, before we jump into that, is I in no way want to say that 2-ways are not a good design. And as a matter of fact, we make two-ways. We've made two-ways. We don't currently have them in our product assortment, but we've had highly successful two-way designs. And so what I really wanted to state is it's about implementation and skill level. I was simply, I guess, tooting our horn.
Well, no, you're right. We do have
this.
two ways.
Was the two-way easier to design than the three-way?
No.
Yeah, I would say not necessarily. I mean, because, well, okay. I think that I think that Leif benefits.
Right on, just on paper, though, it would be like you have two things to get to work together.
Well,
or
let's
three.
put it this way.
Let's
put it this way.
right?
The cost of goods is less. I can tell you that right now, right off the bat. Right, you have one less. You have two less drivers in a stereo system, plus the network. Right. So, and then the cabinet is probably going to be a little bit bigger, whatever. So the challenge of making any design speaker, whether it's a $300,000 speaker or a bookshelf or whatever, it's a multifaceted process. Right. It's not about the cone. It's not about the two-way, three-way. It's not about the cabinet construction. There's a lot of companies working very hard to simplify the speaker process so that the consumer can say, oh, aluminum is the way to go. I'm therefore going to buy aluminum. That's a wonderfully trite way of approaching it. But the truth is that there's a lot of factors that go in. So to answer your question, two-way easier than three-way, depends. If you don't have proper driver selection, let's say between the two-way and you've got better driver selection with the three-way, even though it's another driver to integrate, it seems to want to go together, especially when you're using the coaxial that we're using, as opposed to, for example, two diverse.
Do you think a really brilliant designer could make almost any material sound as good as another material?
I can't answer that completely. I can say, necessity is the mother of invention. And I would say that was a big piece of what we've done over the years. To carry the flag for my father, he did some exceptional stuff with some really inferior components in the past.
You have no idea. You should see some of the stuff we have at the shop.
I mean, I mean, just like the way technology advances in general, that is like the very essence of growth. It always starts with raw tools that we refine, and then we get more tools to work with that are better at doing what the job is.
But what was funny, I'll let you finish, but what was funny for me is like, what's it been, 10 years? 10 years. I mean, like, you don't understand, like, in our factory, we have this, what we call the graveyard. And it's literally thousands of these transducers and tweeters and everything that, we've tried out through all the years. And then there's the Albert von Schweikert pile. And it cracks me up because I go in there and I can tell just by looking at the driver, I'm like, oh man, this thing's freaking old as dirt. But then I look at some of the things, I'm not going to say what they are, but some of the things that he's done to modify that driver. And what's funny is, and I talked to him about it, and I'm looking at it, I'm going, okay, so I see where he's going with this. And what's funny is you see that implemented into today's technology from some of these transducer manufacturers, the trip, the things Albert was working on way back in the day, it was just crazy. It was awesome.
The other thing I find really interesting about this whole concept is that the main idea for drivers, the voice coil, moving a diaphragm with what's the thing that goes around the edge called again?
But the voice coil. What are you talking about? The surround?
The surround, yeah.
Yeah, your suspension.
Yeah, with the surround or suspension. It hasn't really changed. The idea of it, right, hasn't changed in the last 20, 40 years from its original concept.
Right.
Do you guys feel like we've reached the top of what we can do with this thing? Do you guys wish that you could just work with another design? Because I mean, we have electrostat and planar magnetic, and these little things trickle in, but we're working with a pretty archaic original template here.
Right, but the advancements that they've had throughout all these years.
So it is
advancing
advancing still in your mind.
There's still advancements taking place. And one of my hobbies is personal computers, right? And I remember how explosive the advancement was 10 years ago, and how it's kind of diminished because they're hitting kind of theoretical limits.
And I feel like that's the same pattern we're on the cell phone. Like it was incredible for so many years, and now the iterations are just like.
Part of me wonders. Okay, so part of me wonders how much of that is designed into it. There's a limit to miniaturization with what we're doing, right? I would say the stuff that's going on in transducers now is incredible. Like the mid-range we're currently using on our Ultra line, the different type of magnetic structures, voice coil structures, everything it's still advancing and at
so it's not just
rate.
materials. some of the
it's,
back.
it's designs as well.
We are hitting levels of minimal distortion, right? Which is allowing us to hear way more into the recordings than we've ever heard before. We have reference tracks I've been listening to most of my life, okay? And all of a sudden, with the VR111 XS, and now with our Ultraline, that was the one-off, and now with our Ultraline, we've lowered the noise floor so much. Leif and I are listening to recordings, and all of a sudden we're hearing something we haven't heard before, and we're freaking out. We're like, what the heck? And we realized that before that information had been smeared, and now it's coming through very, like it's, how could we not hear it before? Trust me, as far as, for what it's worth, the advancements in transducers is amazing.
And wire
and signal path,
crossover parts have taken a huge leaps and bounds
in the last 5 years.
Really? This is you say that's an interesting number. 5
materials.
years, 10 years.
Yes.
I mean,
yes.
we've seen
yeah.
advancements in the last 5 years. As a statement to me.
So over the years, I would kind of evaluate, the levels of performance of our products as a series of plateaus, right? So we would have some type of revolutionary advancement in technology, whatever it is, transducer, signal path, whatever. And then you have kind of a plateau of iteration, right, where you kind of perfect it, and then you have another spike, and then you perfect that. And I could spend way too much time talking about the different challenges we had with technology back then or whatever. Current generation is, I would say, in my estimation, revolutionary, not evolutionary. And what we've been presenting at shows for our own brand is revolutionary. Whether it is in relationship to the other brands, I'll leave that to the audience to decide. I know when I look objectively at our own components that what's coming out now is a completely different generation in performance.
It's starting to get fun.
So what do you feel is the main driving force behind that advancement? Is it you listed wire, voice coil, driver material? What?
Well,
if you take that
I think we just have other manufacturers, transducers, designers that are they're the same mindset. What can we do? I mean, Damon always used the 10 panes of glass analogy, and
your product is only as good as its weakest link.
Yeah.
So, and again, I really want to reiterate: speaker design is multifaceted. You could have everything else right, and your signal path is wrong, and the design is flawed.
And that's true for the entire rig,
right?
If you have an amp or a preamp or any of those things, it doesn't work. It's got to be perfection across the board, unfortunately. But
right. But
that's
I mean,
how you get to it.
It's the same. It's the same
the
analogy.
panes of glass,
yeah. Well, the panes of glass, or it's like something else. It's like we were setting up for this show here, and we were using one BNC cable, and I'm like, let's try this BNC cable. We put this BNC cable in, and clearly you could hear a total balance of the frequencies from bottom to top. What are we doing? We're actually getting more of those zeros and ones that are supposed to be there. But it's the same thing with the dirty glass. It's like every time these driver manufacturers, or we do something different with the cabinet to lower any sort of cabinet resonance, anything that can alter that signal from whatever it is coming in, you start cleaning those panes of glass, and you start hearing more and more of the information that's available in the music.
Right, but if you have 9 panes of clean glass and one dirty
one, yeah,
it ruins the whole effect.
Right.
So,
Right.
Yeah.
Perfect. Would you rather run a company that made its money from selling a lot of cheaper speakers, or just a lower volume, really high ticket? What's more fun for you? There's not a right answer, right?
Well,
but what would you just prefer?
I would say there's a right answer, but it's subjective, right?
All right.
So,
I mean, it's about your experience
Correct.
doing it. So which do you find more fun or interesting, or in what, why?
okay, I'll jump
You
in.
only have
you
one.
go.
I feel
You
like
go
I've been
first.
talking too much.
No, but
okay.
I'm saying this. It's theoretical because
Yeah.
you have to choose one or the other. It's
Right.
not it's not what the reality is.
No, it's absolutely what we're doing right now. I mean, I couldn't be more thankful for the position I'm in professionally and personally. The chance to work on stuff that really excites me. We put a lot of time and effort into designing the components, and to be able to build those. Everything, like I say, we build is built with an owner's name on it. Even our $8,000 speaker, there's not a warehouse sitting aside with a bunch of, just packaged products, and there's just a bunch of serial numbers. Everything's built to order. It's limited production throughout the year. It's just more rewarding for me, to work on something exceptional, and that sense of joy that I share with our owners when they get it. It's a big deal, and I take it seriously. And while I do enjoy business, and I've worked in other industries and done things like that, I don't enjoy widgets. I have to be emotionally connected to what I'm doing. To me, just a lot of mass product would not be that.
It's so funny you say that, because I found from doing these interviews that there are actually quite a bit of people who work with widgets or whatever for a while, and they make some money, and they're good at it, and they're successful. And have been forced working on something something that lacks so much any emotion to it over a long enough timeline drives them into audio to something that connects them directly to their own emotions through music.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's just a weird, almost like reaction to doing something with no emotion, and then all of a sudden I gotta be like really, because if you're moved by music, for some people that's like a really deep thing, right? So they go to the thing that moves them personally. And I find that such an interesting comment, because it's a recurring theme that I hear from a lot of people in the industry. How about you?
Well, for me, so when we look at Albert and Damon and I were building the VR 111s, to me that was life-changing in the aspect of is what we learned from it. We had a current flagship model at the time, which was the VR11 and the VR9. Fantastic speakers. Matter of fact, to be honest, I'd probably still choose those over most other speakers that are out there. But when we heard the difference on what we achieved with the 111s, I mean, I think Damon and I both simultaneously looked at each other and we're like, "Holy shit!" Okay, and then immediately we're like, "We're gonna design. We have to redesign our whole flagship line." Now, what's funny is, so developing the Ultra 11. Since that development, now what do we do with all our other products? E3s, the Endeavor E3s, the E5. Well, what do? We implement that technology as much as we can and still maintain that price point. And so literally every single speaker, I'm not counting like the LCRs or the Vision Center channel or anything like that, but every single model of our speakers except the VR55, that's the only one we left alone.
Right.
And we left that alone because that was being designed
first
when
manufacturer.
the 111s
Correct.
was being done. So every single one of our products, floor standard speakers, implemented the trickle-down technology. So for me, I love building those cost no object.
Yeah.
What can we do? Let's figure it out. What can we learn from this? And
And there's a craftsmanship that goes along with it. These new designs are Leif's babies, right? I mean, he puts his blood, sweat, and tears into them. And
Like directly into the
well,
you wonder why it doesn't vibrate?
There's
Walls are coated.
yeah,
There's
exactly.
a little DNA in there, I'm sure. But we're hardcore audiophiles. We love music.
We're music lovers.
Yeah, right. And so when we hear that perform, we get just as excited as the end users do.
I've never, been the helm of an audio loudspeaker company myself. But from an outsider's perspective, here's what I would say. I'd say you get the uniqueness on one end of that scale, where you get to do, just like you said, you get to build bespoke, you get to push the envelope, you get to do these things that are like literally amazing to listen to. But on the other side, I do see the appeal to where it's like a more mass appeal. It's like you make more people happy collectively. Now you guys are lucky enough where you have you have both sides of that, it's
Right.
one or the other. But I just find that balance kind of an interesting thing, because there's some guys out there that are making like $99 products, and a lot of people love them.
That's great.
I'm
Right.
not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just
Right,
saying
no.
there's a lot of people, it creates a lot of joy, sparks a lot of joy.
does.
Right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I love it both.
And it's funny you should say that, because I've been, one of the things that I really wanted to do is push down our price points as much as possible. And I've had other manufacturers who I have a great respect for saying, be careful of your brand. Know your brand. And I'm of the mindset that we don't dictate the brand. I mean, you could say that maybe through our actions and the products we produce, I believe that brands are developed and owned by the people who buy them. A lot of times I think companies have made missteps because they think they own the brand and they think they know what it is, and then they do something that fans don't connect with. And I don't want to do that. But on the same side, we started off making full range reference loudspeakers. You didn't have to, they didn't break the bank. We still work hard to do that. One of the things we do is U.S. manufacturing, so that has
So
an
is
impact.
it will your brand ever have a $2,000 floor standard? I like that. I like that guess.
If I could make it so and maintain the brand, yes. But how do you feel? I mean, I don't think you see any problem with that, do you?
What if we could maintain the brand? No, if we could do that. I mean, we would have to source as
Well,
You'd have to do it abroad. It could no longer be you. The first thing you said,
That's
say
right.
is it can't be made in the U.S. anymore.
well, that's a piece. That's a big piece of it. I mean, that's a big piece for us. Our fans will have to tell us whether that's relevant to them or not. But I can say that I've done it the other way. Okay, so we've produced overseas, 100%, partial, whatever, and there are definite impacts on quality, and not just in final QC. When you say, okay, this is the part value I want, and they present something that is substandard, but it meets the part value, and you're like, what the heck is this? And they're like, well, that's the part value. It's like, no. There's a reason why that part is that big. Well, that costs more.
So
but we want that.
That would be my knee-jerk reaction too. Is that stuff made in the U.S. and I'm not trying to cause controversy here. Stuff made in the U.S. is easier to maintain from end to end, and you get more accuracy out of that. But I've asked this question to a lot of people over the last 3 years, and it is not a consistent answer. Almost everything you ask, generally speaking, gets this. You could pull together little threads. Everybody's kind of like, this is one thing though where it's divided, because I hear, well, if you do something out of China, if you work with great people and you put enough money into it and you manage it, fly over there and manage it, it's absolutely possible to. It's not an assumption that if it's made abroad, it's of inferior build.
I'm not saying that.
No,
yeah.
Please.
I'm not saying
because I agree with that.
Yeah.
My
where I'm going with this is, what is the benefit to building in the U.S.? I love this country and I think it's great, and I love it when stuff is made here.
Yep.
But I want to know why when we say this thing's built here, is that so awesome?
Well, I don't think. I think the fact that it's built here doesn't make it awesome. Okay, the legacy of the industry that still exists that impacts that, right? So I mean, we've been doing it. We've been working with a lot of vendors for a long time, right? So it's not just our 40 years of business acumen or whatever in this country. It's our vendors as well. Okay, that's a piece of it.
Relationships,
right? Yeah. Absolutely. And, well, it's just relationships. It's their skill level. Right, so in the products that they're producing, and for me, there is a little bit of a romantic element. There's not a lot of U.S. speaker manufacturers left in general. I mean, there's still quite a few in this industry, but when you look at the grand scheme of the world, we are limited to where we were 10 or 20 years ago.
Really? Really? So it's you're saying it was easier to. There's more countries, and now we're shrinking. The locations available.
Well, what I mean is the manufacturers have diminished. There's fewer U.S. manufacturers, right? So
in the U.S.
In the U.S.,
worldwide.
correct.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we were traveling abroad recently. We're in other countries, and they're making comments about, well, you guys, for some reason, the Americans make great speakers, and they start listing off the brands. And
oh my goodness.
Yeah. So
right.
I do take a sense of pride in that. I feel an obligation that we have to keep that legacy going. The fit and finish, how it's constructed inside as well as outside. There are cultural differences. I have built overseas. We were one of the earlier companies to do that, and we bled as we broke through that wall, and we paid a high, expensive education in that process. And I can say that great products can be made all over the world. It's not exclusive to the U.S., right? But for what we do in our cottage part of this industry, there is something that goes with it. From our own personal perspective, I would say that our ability to control the end product where it has to be here to get that. And like I said, with any design, there's compromises, whether it's price point or whatever. So there's inherently going to be compromises in the performance to hit a $2,000 price point. So you have to think structurally about that, what those compromises and cost of goods, let's just say, would be. And at the end of the day, is the final result going to be what people expect from our brand? Because there's been a lot of companies in the automotive industry that have, luxury brands have tried to make lesser priced products, and it took them 15 years to figure it out, and a lot of customer dissatisfaction in the process. So
what's been said to me, and this is just kind of where I'm coming from, this is that one gentleman created a loudspeaker, and he was working with Seas out of it's Norway, I believe. Is that correct? Seas. And I said to him, "Why did you make this?" Started very simple. Why did you make this speaker out of Norway? And he says this is the only company it's not that I don't want to make it in the U.S. This is the only company I feel like that could make it the way I need it to be made.
Correct.
Is that possible?
No, absolutely. I would say that there are certain. Okay. Again, I try to stay away from ideological perspectives, right? Yeah. So there probably is someone somewhere else, he maybe never found them, whatever, that could do it, right, in another country. But I would say that there are differences, when you produce in another country, from my personal experience, I can't speak for everyone, there were cultural differences that made, that we had to fight through. Yeah. Now, I'm sure things have become easier in the last 10 years. So people have become more proficient, more understanding of how things need to be produced. Yeah, so I would say that to his point, maybe he just didn't find the person, and he is correct for his experience.
Yeah. And again, I'm not saying there's a right way or the wrong way, and it's up to whoever's running the show to make the hard choices, right? And if it makes their life easier to work with whatever, I mean, I think when I said relationships, it matters a lot, like how it's managed, and I think a lot of the guys, maybe they don't think about it or whatever, but it's not just you send them a spec sheet and then the product comes back perfect. It's a very nuanced process that needs to be managed quite a bit. I mean,
correct. And I would say there's a lot of equity there, right? So when you have businesses that are together for a long time, there's a lot of grease between those wheels. Yeah. So you can sometimes communicate an idea in very limited words because they know, and then they anticipate your needs in production. I mean, there's so many elements to that are overlooked when people are just looking at a spreadsheet.
Yeah. Yeah, and we need longevity with you want to design a flagship speaker, and you got to be working with someone that, look, you're going to need to continue to manufacture these specific transducers for us for as long as we need them.
Yep.
Because I gotta be honest, I've heard a nightmare scenario where they did one product and then the factory just bloop gone.
Yep.
They took all the designs, and I was like, you guys didn't have backups? Like, well, they were working on it there. They had it on the hard, and everything was gone. Everything they said.
Yeah, we've been okay. So one of the things you learn having the company as long as we have, and we still service product from the 70s. Okay, we get product recently. We got Vortex screens in for repair, and we're still servicing those items. So you have to think about, okay, well, am I going to have? I need to ensure that I have transducers 30 years from now for the product that's being purchased.
This is where the graveyard comes into effect.
Long-term storage.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a factor that should also be considered by consumers. You're buying, so if you're in high-end audio, I consider the products that are being produced heirloom products. These are not disposable electronics. You don't replace them in 5 years because, if it's still performing awesome, it needs to survive generations without service if necessary.
Do you have customers that have bought multiple?
Oh my God.
What's the most one person's ever bought from you?
Oh my!
That's a tough one.
Well, no. There's a bunch.
Yeah. I mean, is like two?
It's tough to nail it
down.
But
is it like 3, 4? Has anybody about 5 models?
No. 5 or 6 generations. Yeah, we've had people that came into the brand in the '80s and are buying flagships today.
Yeah.
And that's another piece of the business that I'm considerate of. Right. We want to have that low price point because we want to create Von Schweikert customers as quickly as possible. If you like what we're doing, we want to have a product that fits your budget. And so that's why we actively support the used market. I can't tell you, we get so many calls every week just asking about designs, how to set them up, what can you tell me about them, what amp should I use with products that we made 20, 30 years ago. We don't shorten that conversation because they are now a Von Schweikert owner. Even if they have something from 30 years ago, they're a Von Schweikert owner. They're important to us. Their satisfaction is just as important as if it was a recent sale.
Can you give us a taste of what that conversation is like? I'd like to know, what kind of amps do you guys usually recommend to pair with your stuff?
I'm such the wrong person for this.
Okay, let me give you.
Well, what is the conversation like when someone says, "Hey, I got the speakers. What amp should I get now?"
So
maybe you're going to touch on it, but I mean, one of our design goals is, look, we don't build our speakers just to work good with one amp. Yeah. I mean, we have an assortment of different amplifiers. So when we're voicing the speakers, I mean, we are running through all these different.
How efficient do they usually run?
Our speakers?
Yeah.
It
present day.
Yeah, it depends. I mean,
okay. So philosophically, we believe that power is relatively cheap, especially when you compare it to 20 years ago, 25 years ago. So that's where we start from. We are concerned about the best performance, and the best performance requires us to damp our cabinets the way we do, because we don't want overhang, we don't want cone distortion, we don't want that back wave pressure to be affecting the sound. And so, yeah, we want you to have some power. And again, philosophically, we want you to have as much headroom as you can afford, because, you know, the best thing in our opinion is whenever, you know, when you're listening at normal listening level, if you're using 30%, 35% of what your amp is capable of, it's just humming along. So that even at quiet levels, it's humming along. And then when a dynamic passage come in there, it just jumps, right? To answer your question, the first thing we do is we start qualifying, you know, what is this person into? You know, what model do you have? What's the size of your room? What's your source? What's your challenges with the room? What challenges have you found? And then we go from there. You know, we don't just, at least for myself.
How loud do you like to listen to
how loud
music?
do you like to listen to? You know, what kind of music do you listen to? That's all relevant in what we will recommend. So the political and true answer is what Leif said. We design a speaker. The speakers, we try to make them as neutral as possible. We could do a better job of demonstrating them with more manufacturers.
So I totally get everything you're saying, but I want to know, what did you show with at the last show?
Okay, so at the last show it was esoteric, and this is a first for us. We show with the front end often, but we were graciously invited by the U.S. arm of that company to present with them, and they're showing with their electronics. So it's solid state esoteric.
So where do you guys fall in terms of tubes and solid state? Any preferences there?
I'm going to plead the fifth on that. No, I mean,
it's a lot about subjective. Implementation, right? It's also implementation.
It is. We've been using solid state for years. Really have.
And there's amazing product out there.
There is. But right now, lately, I've been on a tube kick like crazy.
And I don't feel like, again, there's no right or wrong answer. And
right.
I actually,
there's actually a lot that goes into that, right? So, back in the 90s, there was such a difference between the tubes and solid state. It's so dramatically changed. And I believe as the technology is perfected, there's less of a sound. If you're looking at the top of the line solid state and the top of the line tube, I would, there's some people that might have a challenge in a blind listening test picking one out of the other. They're very good.
Totally.
Unbelievable. And the reason to choose one or the other goes way beyond performance. It's your personal preference. It's easeability of use. Although the technology with tubes have come a long way with certain manufacturers to make that pretty much not an issue. So
are you implying that the one drawback I thought that everybody agreed on was at least that when you have tubes, those tubes need to be replaced? Are you saying that there is getting to the point where they don't need to be replaced as often?
No. They still need to be replaced. They have a lifespan, right? Yeah. But there's technology on the market where you're not sitting there biasing your amps anymore, and it's literally like plug and play. You just plug things in, turn it on, and then it runs optimally for the life of the tubes, and then all of a sudden a light comes on and says, change this one.
Right.
Actually, get one of those.
It's awesome.
It can come on before it's even needed to be changed.
Actually, it gives you an alert.
Yeah.
To your phone?
No.
Not yet. That
wouldn't be analog.
Maybe that's in the next. Yeah, maybe that's in the next.
It wouldn't be not analog.
Right.
But I got to tell you something. I went overseas, and I got to hear VR111's complete tube setup.
Yeah.
And I'm shell shocked.
I'm
probably a little biased,
DAC.
but it's our speakers, obviously. Yeah. But I mean, the way this guy meticulously put this system together and every component he has. I mean, talk about a cost no object system just from the ground up. And then having a conversation with him. Well, he says if he was ever going to be solid state, he'd buy this certain brand. And it's funny because a year later, or 2 years later, we go down there and we get to hear our Ultra 11 speakers that happen to be on that solid state brand. And my jaw was on the floor.
Yeah.
I was going, holy crap. I mean, this sounds like tubes.
It's not a tube versus solid state thing. It
Right.
really isn't. It's about application and implementation.
Yeah, I think like the kind of stereotypical entry level sound that people associate with tubes that diminishes away as the higher
Absolutely.
up you go. You know,
And same with solid state. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can have super rich, musical, liquidy top end on solid state, just like you have it with tubes, and you can have tight, deep, controlled bass on tubes, just like you have with solid state.
It's
Oh,
amazing
yeah,
what
but-
you could accomplish with enough money thrown at it.
Yeah, but then my system at home kind of
Yeah.
throws a loop kind of
Yeah.
in that a little bit. I mean,
What
because
do you have at the home?
I'm running I got Class A on the front end, but it's Class D.
Yep.
Digital switching on the back. I have basically it's $8,000 worth of electronics
Total.
But I'm running total. But
It's
I'm running it on our
incredible.
$40,000 E5 Mark II speakers, and I've had people with $750,000 systems come in, and they're like, "Holy crap! How is this possible?" The designer of the electronics I had is actually designed for another company that they have amplifiers that are $100,000 plus price point, but the synergy between the speakers, cables I'm using, and the electronics is delivering a performance that just so far exceeds its price point. It's scary. I mean, it's shocking that $8,000 worth of electronics can deliver that type of performance. So, yeah.
You guys have been making products for a lot of years. Is anything different about Von Schweikert now?
I think our design approach is different.
When you say different, I think we're talking about versus a competition.
Yes.
Right?
I don't know if you experience this, but I mean, basically, like if you go and you listen to certain speakers and you're sitting there, and then all of a sudden you get up and you move, or you lean to one side, or there's this huge change or shift in the tonality or of the sound stage of what's taking place, and I wish I could take credit for this, but I can't. I mean, it's what his father has taught me and what his father's researched over all the years.
But I would say that my father did the initial research and development of it. Leif has done an incredible job of not just taking that technology, but advancing it.
The very first moment I went in and sat down in front of a Von Schweikert speaker and I started listening to music, I was like, holy crap, this is cool. This sounds like music. There were things I needed to learn. I had to find out, how is this speaker doing this? How is it that I can get up from my seat and walk over 10 feet and there's literally hardly any change to the sonic signature? And
Or the image.
yeah, or the image. And so a lot of this, almost every single speaker I've sat in front of, they beam. They beam. So, you can sit in the middle, sure, and you have a sound stage, right? But so often the time is that it's just trapped in between these two speakers. So one of the things that we focus on, it's just as important, is when we design a loudspeaker, it is critical for our off-axis response to be a certain way and very, very close to the on-axis response. And I won't say how we do this, but what we're doing is we're actually we're removing that beaming effect from the speaker, or a very, very large portion of it, and actually the speaker is more emitting sound waves more as if a bubble of sound. So this has to do with technology, and we call it GAIN. It's our Global Access Integration Network. This is the heart and soul of every loudspeaker is the crossover. I mean, this is what controls. I mean, obviously,
And the driver.
yeah, and there's
layout.
100 different facets of it, but I mean, the crossover, that's the marriage between the drivers. That makes everything act as one. With the Ultra flagship line, this is something that Albert already implemented in previous flagships as far
2005.
as, in 2005 in the VR9 and VR11. But it was the control suite. You go into a room and you take a traditional speaker. There's no adjustability whatsoever. Well, that room is going to tell you where that speaker is going to have to go, or how much money are you going to have to spend on sound treatment. Where with an ultra flagship product, you that equation is lessened on a huge scale.
Yep.
Because of its adjustability and what you can do as far as is my bass working as dipole, or is it working as monopole, or is it working somewhere in between? I can control the phase of the subwoofer in the back, a crossover frequency, gain. And then, of course, we have a full control suite to control the front ribbon volume, front tweeter volume, and the rear ambience volume.
It's all analog.
It is. It's completely analog. And, of course, there are a factory flat setting, but let's be realistic. No
Right.
one's room's flat, not unless you spend a lot of money. So for me, this is exciting because now we've taken loudspeakers to a level that allows the end user to have complete adjustability to dial that speaker in for that room, minimizing the amount of sound treatment that may be necessary. And then on top of it, it also allows for subjectivity. There's some people that may like a little bit extra highs or less. So
depending on how they hear it. Now, I would say that, so traditional speaker setup from a traditional passive system, let's say that's macro control where you kind of, the room tells you where the speaker is going to go based on the bass, and then you dial it in from there. With this new technology that we've had, several iterations, but we started in 2005, and we're really demonstrating it effectively now in the Ultra line, is you tell the speaker where it's going to go, and then you have micro control adjustments. These auto formers that are hand built with individual signal paths, and they have the smallest footprint on the signal, because ultimately what we're trying to achieve across the entire line, but specifically in the Ultra line, is low distortion, low noise, and we feel like that achieves the greatest effect. And I think that is in part why you can understand how we've been successful at shows the way we have, is because we have we have the right tool for setting up great performance in those rooms.
Right, because the rooms can be very, very difficult to manage.
Right.
You go in there, and a lot of the perfect sound that you hear, when you hear a really good one, you're like, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and Leif's DNA in there.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate making it out.
Thanks for
our
having
pleasure.
us.
Thank you.